Hello everybody, welcome to Red Tool House. On today's video, I want to talk about whether it's a good idea to attach your pig fencing, your electric wire, to trees or to not attach to trees. So let's get into that discussion. So for those of you that are familiar with the channel, you know that we've got about 100 acres of Appalachian hardwood here, with only about 5 of it clear, if you could even call it clear. But most of it's standing wood. So when it comes time to run the pigs through different areas of woodlot or silvopasture that we're trying to create, then the question comes, to try to save as much money with running permanent fence line through the woods, what do we do? Do we just go out and buy fence posts? Do we invest in that? Or do we cheat and attach to trees? And you can see here, this has been 3 or 4 years actually since I've used this, but these insulators I nailed into this little poplar a long time ago. But you can see the previous owners before me, there's some barbed wire that is embedded into this tree as well. So they obviously had some livestock in here keeping it back with barbed wire. So is that really a smart idea? Well, there's some definite pros and cons to it. First, let's look at the cons that are obvious. Well, the first con actually on my list may not be as obvious, but you can see it here in these yellow insulators. Zoom in a little if I can do this without being so shaky. So see that insulator path there of yellow? That's the old line. This line is clearly crooked. So as I put it together several years ago, winding up the spine of this little ridge, then I had to follow the tree. So sometimes I'm on one side of the tree, sometimes on the other. Oh, I got to stretch to go over to this tree, or how do I connect here? So it really made for a crooked line, which aesthetically is an issue. Mechanically, you're going to use a little bit more wire. You're going to put tension when you go to tighten that up. Of course, you're going to put tension this way on some insulators. You're going to put tension this way on some insulators. Obviously, we can't handle topography up and down. We can't do anything about that. But it's really going to put some strain on those insulators, causing them to break sooner and just be an issue there. I don't know that the pigs have an issue with it, that they're like, oh, here's a little alcove and here's an outcropping. Here's this. I haven't really seen that, but it really becomes a mechanical issue when it comes to putting your fence out. Now, when we slide over to my new line, of course, using all fence posts, you can see how nice and straight that is. It goes right up the mountain, straight as an arrow, and just looks a little bit more aesthetically. It looks a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, but it's something I think I can rely on more. I don't have to worry about the insulators being under some sort of weird strain. So I think that's a definite benefit of not nailing to the tree. But let's look at some other cons. Well, an obvious con is, of course, you get to the point where you damage or even kill the tree. So if you look here at this white oak, again, I don't use barbed wire. This is previous owners. You can see this barbed wire in this white oak has really made 2 big scars. And over time, as this tree grows more and more and more, there's a chance that, see here with this inclusion, there's a chance that there's, this will promote rot. So eventually, as this tree gets bigger, this becomes more and more the center of the tree. As the tree grows out, encompassing more of this barbed wire, it's going to have an opportunity to rot that tree out, make it weak at the base, and of course, die prematurely. Well, along that same line, of course, is the issue of having metal embedded in the tree. So you can see here with this barbed wire on this little poplar here, it's really grown fast around that. So it's getting to the point where it's almost the center of the tree. I'll slide over a little bit there. So that metal is really embedded. I'm not getting that out. If I come back 15 years later and go to mill this and not realize there's barbed wire in it, then I'm not going to be too happy as I run my blades through a bunch of metal. So barbed wire is an issue on this place. I've even seen cable, like you'd see like a logger's cable stuck in some trees way on the back of the place where the old gas wells used to be, where they tie off these cables for support of their derricks. So yeah, really an issue, and could be dangerous on down the road from a sawmill perspective, or even bringing a chainsaw in here and cutting. You may look at that and say, well, Troy, that's if I'm going to leave it in the woods for years and years. That's not really an issue. I'll be able to move it before that happens. And in my mind, I've thought of that as well, but you can see here in this footage just a couple weeks ago where I was moving a wire lower that was tied around this beech. The beech had was the loop that I had tension on, so that extra tension, of course, made that dig into the bark sooner. So that was 1 year. Actually, that was almost exactly 1 year when I put that in. And you see that the wire, the bark had actually grown around the back of that wire, and I had really had to wiggle and work it to get it out of there. So if we'd have gone, another season, that would have already been embedded, and then I would have had metal there. So depending on the tree and depending on the tension, it doesn't take long for it to get embedded into the wood. Goodness, like I'm standing on marbles here. So here it is March, and there's still so much hickory nut mast on the ground. It's ridiculous. Okay, so what are the pros of using trees for fence posts when it comes to running your electric fence? Well, obviously, it's the obvious one is economical. If I was going to fence off this area here, my little trail that goes through, if I was going to fence off this side so the pigs could be here, well, I'm just going to run lighter along my trail, then obviously I got to put posts, whatever they may be. I got to put some every so often, and that has expense. If I say, well, I'm going to come back this way a little bit, and I'm going to go from that tree to this tree, back to that pine, and I'm going to angle over to that white oak, and then go back that way. Of course, at that point, I'm only paying for the insulators to nail into the trees. So not really that big of a deal when it comes to expense. Another hickory tree that's producing a ton of mass. So along that same line of trees making cheap fence posts, you can look, let's take this nice, what is this, mocker nut hickory here. If we were going to use it as a fence post, and going to nail in here as we stretch wire this way, if that was what we're trying to do, then you can see that fence post is going to last as long as this tree. And again, depending on whether the wire kills it or not, you could get years, decades, maybe even half a century out of this fence post. My boys could be taking advantage of this being a fence post for them. So there are definitely some benefits. It's a living organic item, so as long as it stays alive, it's going to function as a acceptable fence post. Now here's where this gets interesting, and really the whole point of doing this video is when I do a little research, and bear with me, I'm going to spin around here because I want to show you. This is the edge of my clearing. This is what we brought dozer in and did some work 2 years ago. And if I spin around here, which faces west, you can see here's a stand of small forested area. So this is where I stopped with the dozer. In fact, that's why you see this little bit of dirt pushed up against this dead pine. But you can see there's small trees in here. Here's a dead ash, a little maple. There's a lot of small stuff in here. Here's a beech tree. Here's another beech tree. So a lot of area that I could come in here and say, well, I'm going to clear all this out, just blast it all, put fence posts in, and be done with it. Or I could come in and say, well, I want to clear some of this out, and I want the pigs to take care of it. And I'm not looking for aesthetics when it comes to the fence line, but I want to take advantage of the living posts and what they'll produce. So let's say, for example, I cleared out some of these smaller beeches here, and I've got this one beech that's, it's about 1.5 inches in diameter. I'm going to nail an insulator to it, or I'm going to attach fence to it in a way, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I could come in and say, well, a beech creates really good shade. These branches, they branch out so far, a beech will grow wide branches out. So this beech tree, if we took some of its competitors away, man, it could have branches going as far as 15 feet out as it grows up. And not decades of waiting for it to grow, literally years, it could start to branch out that way. Well, if I was using that, I'd say, hey, here's a nice shade area. If I've cleared all this rest of this stuff out, here's a nice shade area for my pigs to come get comfort in the summer. If I decided to pollard this, which means you're going to aggressively cut it, like maybe even cut it off clear right here. So I cut it at the 4-foot mark. Take that top, discard it. As this starts to grow sprouts and shoots, then I could even come back and cut those pollarded pieces off and throw it down for fodder. Beech leaves on it if it has, depending on the time of year when it starts to produce beech nuts. From a permaculture standpoint, I could then use a lot of those trimmings in other areas for garden mulch, for hugelkultur beds, again, fodder for the pigs or the chickens from the leaves. So it'd be an opportunity to say, this is a scrub beech. There's hundreds of other options around here, but if I'm going to keep this one and use it as a fence post, I really don't care if it doesn't live its full lifespan, but I am going to manipulate it to be able to get fodder, shade from it, but then also be a living post. This post would be... this would work as a post, again, as long as that tree remains alive. Now this just isn't me talking out of the side of my head. I'm going to link below to a Northern Woodlands article talking about this very thing, about how it is beneficial to use trees for fence posts. And it covers some of the topics, or some of the bullet points that I've already hit. But as I mentioned, there's a method to my madness for doing this video, because over here on the North Ridge, which we're going to go to next, is an area that I want to open up for my boars to be on their own pasture. And there's a couple key spots where I'm trying to figure out, do I try to make a real strong corner post here, or do I take advantage of this huge oak that's already there? So come with me. So I've talked about this spot in a video several weeks ago. This is the area that we want to have our boars on. But this white oak you see here in the foreground is what I think is going to be my logical corner for my first paddock. This area would be an area that the boars stay, and then we could obviously have a rotational system going that way. So got this big, beautiful white oak, throws a lot of acorns. Really don't want to kill it, don't want to tear it up. But I do want to consider using this, because if this is a logical spot to turn, since this is the logical spot to turn and go 90 degrees down the hill, if I don't use the tree, then of course I either have to come back this way or go that way and drive some fence posts in to be able to handle that strain of the fence being pulled either direction. Or I could just take advantage of this tree here. So that's kind of what I'm running into. Now, according to the Northern Woodland article that I'm referencing, and some others that I've seen, what they suggest is taking a board. Now, obviously I wouldn't, this is just a treated post that I had right over there. So I just grabbed it for convenience. But imagine this could just be any board. It could be a 2x6, 2x4, whatever the case may be. And if your wire is going to come this side and turn and go 90, then attach the board to the tree with screws, lag bolts, whatever the case may be. And there's recommendations of what type of hardware to use. But have that attached, and of course turning where we're going to go 90, have another one attached here. So then I could use horseshoe nails to run my electric fence through with the little rubber sleeve insulators you can get. It looks like just rubber black pipe that you can run that fence through. So of course the horseshoe nail doesn't ground out your electric fence. And as the tree grows and expands, it takes the board with it. So it's making the board move out. It's not having the wire embed or trying to grow around the horseshoe nails if I nailed directly into it. So a sacrificial board would make sense, less likely to damage the tree to the point of death, and still give you the functionality of not having a whole bunch of metal embedded in the tree or losing your wire at some point. So I'm leaning toward that direction because I really like this tree. I don't want to cut it down, and obviously I want the mast produced from it, but I also don't want to be jamming a bunch of fence posts around the root system here, jeopardizing that. White oaks don't like your root systems messed with. So I don't want to take a chance of killing it that way. And of course I can save money on fence posts and trying to build a really strong corner if I utilize this. So in shooting this video, I've really kind of talked myself into the decision. For reference, you can see that's the anchor tree we're talking about. But the camera is sitting right on the line. We're on the road. It's on the line of where I'd want my fence. I want my fence on this side of my little road here. I don't have any trees to connect to from the camera to our corner except this white oak. And this white oak is so full of lead because they're old. We used to shoot down this direction. This was a target tree, so it's got all kinds of lead in it. So it will not end up on the mill anytime soon. So I really am not worried about attaching to it either. So we'll probably end up doing a bit of a mashup. This tree is strategically located exactly where I want my line. But as I put fence posts in, I don't want to jump down here and try to catch this hickory or go deeper into the woods. You know, I could set a post here, set another post where the camera is, and be able to get that line that I want without, having to run around, grab trees, do all that kind of stuff. And of course, eliminate the need for 2 fence posts at least. Speaking of trees full of lead, this was an old target tree. There's still a bunch of lead in this guy. There's 50 cal. Oh, here goes something right now. It's about a 9mm there. But anyway, Comment below on what you guys think, what you've done, some of the tricks of the trade. As you Google this and look at other options, there's just tons of people that have really neat hacks, neat little tricks that they do to run fencing through the woods. So I'm curious to see what you guys get into. So be sure to share that below in the comments. All right, take care, everybody.